So influencer boxing is known for quite a few things: the promotion, some of its fights, the chaos, and most notably its iconic knockouts and TKOs. In the sport of boxing, knockouts are one of the biggest staples of the sport. Some of the greatest fighters like Mike Tyson and Muhammad Ali were known for their iconic knockouts, which made their fights the more entertaining to watch and made them ultimately legendary. Even in pro boxing today, people watch to see someone get knocked out for the most part. It's really what just makes the fights a little more entertaining to watch. Influencer boxing has become known for its iconic knockouts in more recent years, most notably since the switch from the amateur boxing days to now fighting in 10-ounce gloves and no headgear. Influencers like Jake Paul, KSI, Slim, Papi have become the more well-known knockout artists within the scene. These knockouts and TKOs are definitely factors as to what makes these influencer boxing fights so fun to watch. Of course, being on the internet, we're in a space where people will get memed if they lose in a vicious way, especially if you get knocked out cold. But despite all that, influencer boxing has some really good knockouts and TKOs, especially when you look at it from a pure boxing perspective. Whether it be knocking out former MMA champions or knocking out your opponents in spectacular fashion. Today I want to rank my personal top 10 knockouts so far within the influencer boxing scene. Again, this is my personal opinion, just like my other ranked videos. These are knockouts that I think are some of the most iconic and arguably the best we've had in the scene so far. Again, you're free to let me know in the comments below your top 10 influencer boxing knockouts. I'll also be doing a list of some honorable mentions as well that I didn't get to put in the official list. Anyways, without further ado, here are my top 10 influencer boxing knockouts. Number 10, we got Jarvis vs Michael Lee. This fight happened on the YouTubers vs TikTokers card back in June 2021. Jarvis fought this TikToker Michael Lee on the very first Social Gloves card and was able to get a clean knockout on him in the second round. Jarvis and Michael were going at it for 2 rounds. Jarvis was able to land some good shots on Michael that caused him to get a standing count at least twice within that first round. Then the second round starts. Eventually Jarvis is able to get Michael on the ropes, and then he knocks him out cold with a vicious right hook. This was very impressive, not only because this was Jarvis's first fight, but also the fact they were, I think, using only 14 or 16 ounce gloves for this fight. The fact that Jarvis was still able to land cleanly on Michael even in that big of gloves, you just gotta respect it. And fun fact, Jarvis was actually one of the only YouTubers to get a knockout on that card, besides I guess Austin McBroom. But mind you, this was the cleanest knockout, and in my personal opinion, this was the most impressive to happen that night. A lot of people forget about this fight and forget this was the performance that really put Jarvis on the map. I mean, to be honest, Michael Lee is probably not that great of a boxer though, let's be honest. To his credit though, he was still trying a little, and respect him for still getting in the ring. But Jarvis was clearly the way better man and showed levels with the way he knocked him out. It was definitely a very big highlight of that whole night and was definitely a top tier knockout, which is why I feel like I needed to put it on this list. Number 9, we have Deen the Great vs Waleed Sharks 1. Deen vs Waleed 1 was definitely one of the best fights that we've had in this scene so far from at least a technical boxing perspective. Highly skilled fight and arguably had the best influencer boxing knockdowns, with Waleed knocking Deen down a couple of times until he eventually gets caught with a knockout from Deen in the third round. I think just the way Deen came back after getting knocked down to then getting a knockdown on Waleed, making him quit, made it quite fascinating. Waleed was legit almost winning the fight, but then he unfortunately got caught with a right hand from Deen. The fight would just get stopped since Waleed turned his back to the ref after walking back to his corner. Deen would end up winning the fight, which left a lot of fans seeing this fight being so close that they were even begging for a rematch. Of course, the rematch would end up happening on the Prime card and Deen obviously won that. But in that second fight, there wasn't even any impressive knockdowns in that compared to the first fight. Overall, Deen vs Waleed was one of the best influencer fights and definitely had some of the greatest knockdowns. Number 8, we got Papi vs Josh Bruckner. This was supposedly one of Papi's toughest tests. After fighting and beating up not that great of opponents, Papi had to level up and challenge himself to prove his worth. The fight would go on for 2 rounds. Papi made easy work with Josh and was able to toy with him throughout that entire fight. Papi was using his counter punching tactics to his ability in this fight. Whenever Josh threw, Salt just countered all those punches back. Papi eventually dropped Josh Bruckner in the second round with the left hook, and the fight would get stopped with, of course, Papi winning. This was the fight that really showed how much of a problem Papi was to the other influencers during this time, even having people believe he had a chance to destroy KSI and Jake Paul, which is just crazy to talk about, especially right now. I mean, to be fair, this knockdown really proved that he had potential to be one of the top dogs, well, at least during this time. Number 7, we got Nissan Gibb vs Austin McBroom 1. So Gibb vs Austin would finally be set to be happening on Social Gloves 2 in September of 2022. Of course, Austin coming off that impressive victory against Bryce Hall on the YouTubers TikTok card a year prior, and also Gibb coming back with vengeance after getting nearly robbed of his last win against Taylor Holder. Early in the fight, within the first round, Austin was able to drop Gibb, but it didn't really do much as Gibb just got back up. During the fight, Gib would knock down Austin a couple of times. Austin's gas tank started to really show and he couldn't really handle Gib's pace. In the 4th round, Gib drops Austin one last time and the fight would get stopped as Austin just couldn't continue. Literally after this fight, Austin was rushed to the hospital due to him just not feeling well that day, and on top of that, also him getting knocked down all those times. Gib's knockdowns were definitely a highlight of that fight and I guess the overall event. Just Austin being able to knock down Gib in the 1st round, but it became a plot twist as Gib came back and knocked Austin McBroom down and was able to stop him. Definitely was one of Gib's best performances even to this day. Number 6, we got Papi vs Andy Warski. This was one of the fastest knockouts in influencer boxing history at this time. The fight happened on the very first Misfits 01 card back in August 2022. Papi fought against this guy Andy Warski, who, let's be honest, wasn't really all that good, but I guess this was just a tune-up fight for Salt to really prove his potential. The fight began, and before you know it, Papi was able to knock out Andy Warski 29 seconds into round 1, in which the fight couldn't continue. Papi got the victory, and it was one of the biggest highlights of that event. I think this knockout was definitely the most talked about from this event, and Papi would somewhat become a star from this moment. This knockdown was a step closer to putting Papi on the map and showing how he could potentially be the next big star within the scene. Number 5, we got Slim vs Faze Temper. This fight also happened on Misfits 01. Slim stepped in to take on Faze Temper on 2 weeks notice after Blueface had to pull out due to his controversy at the time. Slim would be the replacement fighter for that fight. In this fight, we didn't know what Slim could really bring to the table, well, until the fight started, that is. Slim and Temper went at it for 2 rounds. Slim was landing way more shots than Temper. Temper couldn't really deal with Slim's awkward style and didn't really train for that because, this was on short notice. Temper also kind of got found out in this fight as well. Out of nowhere in the 2nd round, Slim has Temper on the ropes and was able to knock him out cold. This, just like the Papi fight, was also a big highlight of that event. Man, Misfits 01 was just so good. The fact that Slim was able to do that with only 2 weeks notice was just really impressive. Just thinking about it, imagine if he had a full training camp for this fight. This fight would solidify Slim's name within the influencer boxing scene and will put him on a higher pedestal. Number 4, we got Jake Paul vs Nate Robinson. Ah yes, we all know about this fight. Jake Paul would fight former NBA star Nate Robinson on the undercard of Mike Tyson vs Roy Jones Jr. in November 2020. Jake would end up knocking down Nate within the 1st round, hitting him above the ear. But Nate continued and still pushed on. Once the 2nd round began, Jake would knock Nate down a 2nd time, this time hitting him on the forehead. But of course, Nate just got back and still went on. Nate would run into Jake's infamous right hand, which sent him face down on the canvas and ultimately got him slept. Nate couldn't continue, so the fight got stopped and Jake was of course the winner. One of the more cleaner knockouts we've had in this scene, especially with the level Jake was at during this time compared to the other influencers. Nate may have not been that much of a challenge, but credit where credit is due. Probably one of the best knockouts on the scene. Number 3, we got Slim vs Papi. This would happen as the fight before the co-main on the prime card. 2 of the top guys in the scene at the time would go at it to really prove who's truly the best. In the fight, Papi was somewhat arguably winning the first 2 rounds. However, Salt would start to get a little too cocky like he did in the AT fight, and eventually his cockiness would get the better of him. Eventually Slim would catch Papi and knock him out in the 3rd round. But Salt still got up and continued on, was pretty slow but showed determination to not give up. Eventually Slim would get Papi on the rope, stopping the fight with Slim winning by TKO victory. This was a grudge match and we just didn't really know who would win, considering Salt had the first 2 rounds and then Slim would just come back out of nowhere and get the job done. Definitely a top tier knockout in the scene and a big highlight from that prime card. Number 2, we have KSI vs Faze Temper. Misfits 04 would headline KSI with his 2nd warm-up fight against YouTuber Faze Temper. The fight began between the two. JJ would try to find his range with Temper since Temper did have a range advantage over JJ. Now this was the very first fight where KSI would use his infamous karate stance inspired by Michael Venom Page. Eventually KSI was able to get Temper out within the 1st round with a clean knockout. It was such a great knockout just cause JJ's new style actually worked. Eventually after the Temper fight he started implementing the style more and it definitely does work for him, well for the most part anyway. From this fight, JJ proved that he was on an even higher level than most of the other influencers and could be a problem for Jake if they ever fight. Even many fans start to gain some faith in him possibly beating Jake Paul again. Of course the style JJ used in that fight was inspired by Michael Venom Page, MVP, and he actually trains at the same gym, Shoot Fighters, so it makes sense. Now we got some honorable mentions. We have Fox the G vs Small Spartan J. A more recent fight with Fox making his debut and getting an early knockout victory over Small Spartan J. Pretty impressive for his first fight. Anthony Taylor vs Ashley Raksu. The 2-second knockdown on Raksu caught many off guard. The fact Anthony Taylor got a quick knockout within the first 2 seconds of the fight just really showed his levels. Deji vs Fuzi. Towards the end of the fight, Deji would be able to knock down Fuzi with a jab. This was also Deji's redemption fight too, and was a really big part of Deji's performance that night. Jake Paul vs Nissan Gibb. One of Jake's best performances to date, knocking Gibb down within the first round and really showing good technique in that fight. He was able to send Gibb to the floor a couple of times until the ref eventually stopped the fight. Austin McBroom vs Bryce Hall. Austin was able to stop Bryce in the third round, knocking him down of course a couple of times. That was until the ref officially stopped the fight, since Bryce had trouble getting up despite wanting to continue. That's all the honorable mentions I have. Now here's what we have at number 1. Number 1, we finally have the one and only Jake Paul vs Tyron Woodley 2. Of course, we all know about the infamous Tyron Woodley knockout. If you've been watching influencer boxing for the past few years, you've had to know about this infamous knockout. It's just become such an iconic moment within the scene that I had to put it at number 1. Jake Paul and Tyron Woodley had their rematch a few months after their original fight. Tyron stepped in on 2 weeks' notice after Tommy Fury pulled out due to his injury. Of course, the rematch would go on for 6 rounds until Tyron got pulled out cold by Jake in the 6th round, ending the fight there. This was one of the most impressive knockouts during that time, and still holds up even now. Jake Paul, a YouTuber knocking out a former UFC champion, was impressive on the surface. This was the fight Jake Paul would knock out a tougher opponent, as prior he didn't really have that much credibility from his last opponents. And I know MMA and boxing are different, but still give credit where credit is due. Tyron was definitely 10 times better than Ben Askren and Nate Robinson. It was a really great knockout by Jake either way, and really proved how much power he has with his overhand right. This, like the Nate Robinson knockdown, also got memed, and it just became an iconic moment to say the least. And these are my top 10 influencer boxing knockouts and TKOs. I think we'll see a lot more impressive knockouts in the scene that could top these, you never know. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss out on brand new videos. I'd love to do more ranking videos, so let me know in the comments below what I should rank next. I ranked the first 10 Misfits events a while back, so if you want to check that video out, I'll leave a link in the description, or I'll leave it in the end card. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. More things to come this year, and I am Mega Shadow, signing out. Peace.